Okay, so I think we can probably get started. People will continue to trickle in, but we at least have a good number of people to start right now. There is a link in the chat to this Jamboard that everybody can see that I'm broadcasting to your screen right now. But if you use the link to the Jamboard, you can also get on there and introduce yourself. I'll talk a little bit more about the Jamboard later, but this is one of the ways that we're going to use to connect with each other and share ideas and talk. This Jamboard will be available after the discussion. So if you want to get in a little practice, you can just start by using a sticky note. So we're here on the left and putting your name and pronouns and where you're from or what you do on a sticky note. So we have an idea of who's here. I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Meg Horrigan. I'm the Connecticut Food System Alliance coordinator. We're a grassroots and network building oriented organization working to build connections between people and organizations who are interested in food across the state. I am going to switch over to the presentation today so we can get underway. Okay, so as I said before, you can't see it on my screen now, but hopefully you have it open. We do have this Jamboard. There's multiple frames on the Jamboard. You're encouraged to take notes, jot down any insights, and add lingering questions to this Jamboard. There's a sticky note feature, a text box feature. You can try to draw on it if you're really talented, or if you're not. I'm not going to discriminate on that. But you can also add photos from your device or even the internet browser. During your breakout group session, you'll use a different frame of the Jamboard, and there will be a Jamboard frame corresponding to your group member. Your facilitator will help you by screen sharing the Jamboard, and you'll be able to contribute together. We're really looking for this Jamboard as kind of a work product that comes out of this meeting together. So don't be afraid to get a little messy on the Jamboard. Have fun with it. We're really excited about what we can share and communicate to each other, and really hoping to capture some interesting things on the Jamboard. So thanks for playing along with it. Just to reintroduce the Connecticut Food System Alliance a little bit, we build connections between groups and people committed to creating a more just, equitable, and sustainable food system for the state. And we really try to apply this food justice lens to all of the work. And so food justice is really is a lens that invites us, when we're thinking about food and farming, to think about who grows and harvests that food and who did it historically, whether they're safe and well paid, and who's doing it now, and are they still safe and well paid, who uses food stamps and food pantries, and are their choices policed, are they able to get everything they want and need, and who cooks food at restaurants, for example, are those people safe and well paid? And then on the other side of that, of those questions, kind of the converse is, who owns the land that food is grown on? How and why did it change hands? Who owned and lived there historically? Who eats healthy and local? Are those the same people who use food stamps and food pantries, either in your assumptions of what you're making about these people, or like what the actual usage patterns are? Are their choices policed the way they would be if they were using food stamps or food pantries? And then also, who owns the restaurants? Who gets famous by owning restaurants? Who do we think of when we think of really accomplished cooks? So food justice, from the literal book on food justice, seeks to ensure that the benefits and risks of where, what, and how food is grown, produced, transported, distributed, accessed and eaten are shared fairly. So making sure that we all get the same amount of benefit and are all able to kind of disperse the risks of producing and growing and disposing of food. And so a little bit, first I should say, we are recording this meeting. If you don't want to be recorded, you can turn your camera off. A lot of the meeting will be done by screen share anyway, but just want to let you know that we're being recorded right now, so that we can either share the meeting with people who weren't able to be here, get all that stuff for posterity's sake. To just give you a little bit of background about what this meeting is about, this is our Reimagined Summit for COVID-19. We were originally planning a summit that had nothing to do with a pandemic and nothing to do with Zoom or Jamboards or any of it. Back in May, we obviously had to cancel that. And instead, this is the second session of our virtual summit, which we split out into 4 parts, about designing resilience for food and farming in Connecticut. Really looking to try to build off the experiences and lessons that have happened during COVID and that will continue to happen, to see what we can do about making a more resilient food system. This session on assets and gaps is the second in our series. Some of you joined us last week where we talked about the food supply chain and adaptations that were going on in our grocery stores and in the emergency food supply chain. After this, we will be diving into policy and funding for systemic change. And then a concluding session will revisit all these themes and we'll invite you back. Some of you will be asked even to present and sum up some of the things that come out of these meetings at our final concluding session in October. And we have a full list of all the sessions and their information on our website, which you can check out. This session is also building into our development for a statewide food action plan. And a food action plan is really a vision for what food and farms should look like in a given jurisdiction. So you could write a city food action plan or one for the county or the state. This is one that we're looking to build based on the state view of the food system. Food action plan includes a vision that may include no hunger, sustainable farms, lots of local food for everybody, really great school meals, community farms, livable wages. It includes data indicators so that we can see like where we're at between where we are now and what the vision is. So the amount of local food that's purchased every year, how much land is in agriculture, how many children participate in school breakfast, what's the food security rate, things like that. And finally, policy. It includes some policy recommendations that could include like a state food stamp farmers market incentive program, ways to support healthy food retail, expanding and protecting the state farmland preservation programs. Basically, a food action plan is a roadmap for community organizations, governments, individuals, and businesses to help shape a better food system together. To give you an example, Connecticut's the only state in New England without a food action plan, and I wanted to share with you our neighbors. The Massachusetts local food action plan has 4 goals around increasing production of Massachusetts grown foods, creating job and economic opportunity in food and farming, increasing and improving the wages and skills of food system workers, protecting land and water, and reducing hunger and food insecurity. It's a really ambitious project. It was completed in 2015. And they got participation from more than 1,500 people. And by being here today and contributing to the Jamboards and asking questions of our presenters and generally participating, we're hoping that you will be one of our participants and contributors to a food action plan. So we really thank you for being here today. So where are we with the Connecticut food action plan? COVID has really roughed some things up a little bit, but before all that happened, we did have several listening sessions that included beginning farmers in Wethersfield and New Haven, we talked to residents who are interested in a food co-op in Hartford. Coming up, we're going to do a series of virtual one-on-one interviews with community gardeners and working parents, do all of those in different languages, to have a kind of deeper and more personal take on input for a food action plan, and a lot more as we figure out how to work in this new setting. So we ask you and everybody who's participating in this food action plan, what should it look like in Connecticut? How would it look different from maybe other plans if it centered food justice, ensuring equity, access, and dignity for everybody who has anything to do with food in Connecticut? And we hope also that you want to be a part of creating it. Before we get to our speakers who are going to talk about the assets and gaps in the food system based on where they sit within that food system, I want to include a message from our sponsor. The Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Foundation is sponsoring this series, and they have a healthy food fund that's really able to support these innovative different programs. So we're just going to watch a brief video from these folks. I think I need to change my.
If you really look at what's going on with the way that food is.
This is.
It was playing, Meg.
Yeah, I know. And then it was like, I think we're going to the next slide, and it stopped.
If you really look at what's going on with the way that food is marketed and promoted to kids, especially inner city kids, as genetically processed, sugary foods, things that are not promoting health and wellness. So my hope today for what the kids will take away is to have a little bit better understanding about where their food comes from. We've been really honored to work with Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. Our roots are in Boston and they always will be. And when we decided that we wanted to partner with someone locally to make a difference in health and wellness for children, we thought that there wasn't a better group that we could go to. The fact is that we love watching the impact that it makes. These kids, they ask a ton of questions. You can see their eyes and their faces light up. And I really do feel like they all walk away from the farm every year with a renewed sense of enthusiasm for trying to get out there and make some healthier decisions.
So again, just thank you to Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. We have a few folks from the foundation with us today, and really appreciative of wanting to support this longer term and systemic based work. That brings me to another group that's been supporting these sessions. This is Quest and Leadership Greater Hartford. I'm going to turn it over to you guys to talk about both the Healthy Hartford program and about Quest in general.
Thank you very much, Meg. My name is Chris Edge. I'm Economic Development Director of the town of Berlin. We created a group within Quest 2020, which is run by Leadership Greater Hartford. It is a leadership group and organization, nonprofit, that helps create and strengthen leadership in Greater Hartford. We come from all different segments of the economy, business, profit, nonprofit, et cetera, and it's been a great group to work with. Our Healthy Hartford group, really the task was to work to see where the different pieces that are missing, such as we're talking about today, other food deserts, other things that really are important. And so we've been very blessed to partner with Meg and her group to help them with this and really move the conversation forward, because it is important. No matter whether you live in the suburbs or the inner city, this affects all of us. And we're very blessed as a group from Quest 2020 and Healthy Hartford to partner with them and make all these sessions a success. Thank you, Meg.
we're going to have two speakers. They're sitting in very different positions in the food system, but really offer unique perspectives. And so we'll have these two presentations, and then we'll have a question and answer session afterwards. So hold on to your questions until we have the Q&A session. I want to introduce now Sam Garwin with GreenWave. She's the leader of their market innovation program, mobilizing investments, incubating new products, and creating market opportunities for regenerative ocean farming for GreenWave, which is a nonprofit that trains and supports regenerative ocean farmers in the era of climate change. Sam has previous experience with a social enterprise called Maya Mountain Cacao, working on high quality direct trade organic cocoa bean sourcing, now part of the Uncommon Cacao Group. She has experience with product management, human-centered design, supply chains, strategic partnerships, and organizational development. Before she came to this food and agriculture space, she worked at another startup called Endica, e-commerce and business analytics software company that's now owned by Oracle. So please welcome Sam Garwin.
Thanks, Meg.
Sam, I just need to find your face in here so I can give you the steering wheel.
Okay.
There you go. You should be able to share now.
Thank you. All right. Let's see if it lets me do this. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes. Awesome. Great. Well, I'm really excited to be here today. As Meg said, I work with a nonprofit called GreenWave. Just a show of hands so I know what I'm working with. How many of you have heard of GreenWave before? And there's a lot of you not on video, so you can yeah, there you go, Chelsea. Nice work. Cool. Okay, so it's like 50-50, maybe a little less. Awesome. Well, so GreenWave is a New Haven, Connecticut-based organization, but it's actually a national nonprofit that supports ocean farmers. And that's not a term that is very widely known yet, but part of my job today is to explain to you why we are at the beginning of a really, really exciting movement, and Connecticut is uniquely positioned at the forefront of that movement. So the idea with ocean farming is just like you can grow food and fuel and fertilizer on land, you can also do it in the ocean. And that work is the foundation of what we're calling the blue-green economy, and which will become more and more important as climate change changes everything we know about agriculture. So our organization, just to give you a high-level view about what we do, our main focus is on training and support for new ocean farmers, and that's through webinars, workshops, and cultivating our network of leaders. And we are also working on an online platform, and this was even something we were really looking to do pre-COVID, but now has become even more important in the COVID times, to really take a lot of the resources that we've been delivering one-on-one and through in-person interactions and put them into a digital format that people can interact with around the world. And so our goal is to reach 10,000 farmers over the next 10 years. Another piece of our work is innovation. So we do a lot of research with universities like UConn, Stony Brook University, and we also work with Woods Hole here in Massachusetts. I'm actually based in Massachusetts. But we work on research that helps us understand how to make better farms, but also how to use those farms not just to grow food, but also to measure what's going on in the water and to measure the ecosystem services that our farms are providing, which some of you have probably heard that there are efforts going on to actually have a carbon market and to reward farmers for the ecological services that they're offering. So we want to be a part of that in the ocean as well. And then a big part of my job is to open market opportunities by facilitating relationships between farmers, buyers, processors, co-packers, anyone who might be important in establishing infrastructure that will help get ocean farmers' crops to customers. And for something like seaweed, which does not have an existing market, it's a pretty big challenge. So what is an ocean farm? It's a little graphic over there. You can take a look. That's sort of what it looks like. But the idea is that it is a polyculture. So just like we want diversity on land, we want diversity in the water. We shouldn't be growing one species ever. We want to be growing seaweed along with shellfish, such as oysters, clams, mussels, and scallops. And the advantage of this vertical system where we put lines in the water and then have our crops growing down off of that is that it's a really small footprint. And then if you're in a boat, you don't really see anything. You see a few buoys and that's it. So it's really, really low aesthetic impact, which everyone in the sound appreciates. The model that GreenWave uses is also really replicable. Unlike land farming, which is often very difficult to get into ownership or find land that's available to lease, you really don't need much to start an ocean farm. You need some rope, you need some buoys, you need a boat, and you need a lease and a permit, but you're not owning it. There's no sense, for better or worse, in the ocean of owning the ocean. And so there's this idea that we could be utilizing this commons that we have to grow food. And I think possibly the most compelling piece of ocean farming is that it is zero input, which if you think about land farming is kind of a huge advantage. The fact there's no fertilizer, there's no fresh water, there's no pesticides, there's no nothing. All you do is put your lines in the water with seed on it, and partially because we are actually we've overloaded our ocean waters with nutrients washing off of our land farms, there's actually plenty in there for the kelp to draw off of. And in the process, we're really rebuilding marine ecosystems. So this session is about assets and gaps. So I'm gonna start with the assets first, then talk about the gaps. Connecticut, again, is really uniquely positioned as the home for farming seaweed. The reason for that is that it's native. So this is not like some crazy crop that we've all of a sudden dreamed up. It grows in the water naturally. We, by cultivating it, are simply making it so that we are not drawing down our natural supply. We're not being extractive in our model. We are taking a species that naturally exists, and our process is that in the fall, we collect source tissue, wild, diverse source tissue from the wild. We kind of stress it out, make it spawn, and then we take those seeds, and that is what we're replanting, and that's the seed that we're providing to other farmers we work with. So Long Island Sound, pretty incredible. It's a natural home for sugar kelp, which is the species we grow here. Not only does it grow really well, but it is a source of not just food, but all kinds of other things. So yes, food for humans and livestock. Then there's also fertilizer. When we think about, I mentioned, the runoff from farms, the opportunity to use things that you grow in the water, there's going to be some of it that can go toward food or plastics or something else, but you're always going to have some left over. The idea of recycling that into nutrients that then you could put back onto the farm is a pretty cool idea of actually closing that nutrient loop in a truly regenerative process. There's also a lot of people paying attention to the use of seaweed and seaweed extracts as an alternative to plastics. There are several companies in the United States and a few in the UK that are really betting a lot on specifically this species of kelp, sugar kelp, being used as a material, as a key feedstock, they call it, to create these materials that are going to replace plastics, hopefully at some point in the future. And then, as I've already mentioned, there's this concept of ecosystem services where, as our kelp is sucking up excess nitrogen, sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, we are providing services which at some point there will be a market for, an online marketplace, and farmers will be able to get paid for those services in addition to the physical crops that they're producing. Another huge asset of ocean farming is that this is an immense economic opportunity for working waterfronts, and Connecticut has a lot of working waterfronts, areas that have historically been for fishermen. And as climate change is pushing a lot of the species that we are normally used to fishing further and further north, we need to give them the opportunity to diversify. So a lot of people are not just farming sugar kelp. They're farming sugar kelp, again, as part of a rotation. So sugar kelp has this nice habit of you plant it in October, November, and it's actually a winter crop. So it grows all winter long and you harvest it in the spring. And that's a really nice complement for people who during the summer have other kinds of jobs on the waterfront. And another thing that I really want to emphasize here is that right now there is very minimal competition for the New York City market for seaweed. And that's mostly on the food side of things. But New York has really not gotten its act together with respect to permitting. It's not that it's not legal, it's just that there is no permitting process for seaweed in New York. So despite the fact that Long Island is on the opposite side of the Sound, they can't grow seaweed right now for food, and we can. So if we have this very unique opportunity if we get our regulatory act together to push Connecticut ahead of New York and really kind of claim Southern New England the way that Maine has really made a name for itself with seaweed. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later. How am I doing on time, Meg? Great. Okay, so let's talk about some gaps. So despite the fact that you can legally permit in Connecticut, it is not easy. So there are multiple different agencies you need to talk to. It's long, it's expensive. Some people who think they want to go into ocean farming just kind of stop because they get exhausted. So that's, other states such as Maine, which you'll hear me bring up a lot. Maine has an incredibly friendly regulatory process for seaweed. They also have an organic certifier, which has come up with a process for certifying cultivated seaweed, despite the fact that the federal standards say nothing about seaweed. So Maine has the largest seaweed industry on the East Coast, and I don't know if they're ahead of Alaska yet. It's Maine or Alaska in the US for who's leading in terms of production and sales, but permitting is a huge piece of that. If you can't get in the water, you obviously can't farm. Another gap or challenge, I would say, for seaweed farmers is that raw seaweed has to be processed basically within 24 hours of coming out of the water to maintain quality. And GreenWave, through my work with GreenWave, we're doing a lot of research on how that stabilization can happen. We'd love to partner with seafood processors throughout Connecticut to include kelp in what they do. Right now, the state requires that seaweed processing have a seafood HACCP plan, so it kind of fits nicely into that framework. However, it's a little bit challenging to convince. Seafood people see it as a vegetable, and vegetable people see it as seafood. So it's kind of a little bit messy there. Related to that stabilization is the fact that there is no infrastructure for processing. So we're working on that a lot. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there are no federal standards for organic certification of cultivated kelp, which is kind of ironic. So there are organic standards for wild harvest kelp and seaweed, which you have no actual control over, but there is no certification for organic cultivated kelp. Again, Maine's MOFGA has come up with a standard, so you can get organic kelp from Maine, but from nowhere else in the United States. Other gaps: logistics. Transportation of wet seaweed is difficult and expensive. The first state to figure out how to dry seaweed will make a lot of money. And one of the things that we've been experiencing and experimenting with, rather, with GreenWave is last year we did this, or earlier this year, we did a pilot with the empty tobacco barns in Western Connecticut and Northwestern Connecticut. And it turns out seaweed dries quite well in a tobacco barn, but we don't have approval from the government to move that forward. So we're really hoping that they will collaborate with us on making that happen, because it could be a huge export for the state of Connecticut if we can get it dried. But as is, your only options are to freeze it, and then you're paying for cold storage and a lot of shipping costs. Related to the drying issue is food processing regulations. Because this is such a new crop for the United States, the FDA and the USDA do not really have any guidance on how to process seaweed. And so they've left it to the states to figure that out case by case. So it is up to each state for how strict or lenient or which guidelines they want to follow. We're also in a challenging place competing with the low prices offered by the international and wild harvest markets. As we've discussed, wild harvest is extractive. We're just taking from the environment without replacing it. So we don't really want to do that. The international markets, talk about food justice, have a lot of issues with respect to labor and you know, food safety over there is an entirely different thing as well. So you can bet that the seaweed being dried in Indonesia is not being done in a food safe way, and yet we're okay with eating that here. So a lot of challenges with how do we elevate the domestic crop over this cheaper international product that's coming in. And then of course there's eater education. We've seen huge leaps and strides in this just in the last year. Sweetgreens, one of the biggest fast casual chains in the country, bought 22,000 pounds of seaweed from Atlantic Sea Farms in Maine earlier this year. So, you know, and did a big New York Times advertising campaign and had a piece in the Washington Post. So I really think this is up and coming, but it is a little bit of a challenge still, as it's not a familiar ingredient. And I think it's very much still in the Asian centric. People think of it as something that is in Asian cuisine only, as opposed to just another vegetable like ingredient that could be incorporated into a wide variety of cuisines. So that's it. That's what I got.
Thank you, Sam.
You're welcome.
Okay, so thank you so much. That was really exciting, and I particularly liked hearing about the tobacco barns. Like that's really at the core of, that just feels like such a good example for this session of like how we repurpose what we have to really make big moves. So next, to talk a little bit more about an industry I assume we're all a little bit more familiar with, is Wayne Pesce from the Connecticut Food Association. He's been the president since 2015, and the CFA is dedicated to promoting the growth of Connecticut's grocery and food supplier community. He's served on the state's extended producer responsibility packaging task force and the bottle bill reform task force. He was also instrumental in helping pass the state's single-use plastic bag law in 2019. He's a lifelong Connecticut resident, graduated from Southern Connecticut State University, and he lives in Middlebury with his wife, Elaine, and 2 daughters. The Connecticut Food Association was founded in 1933. They have programs for public affairs, food safety, research, education, and industry relations for 240 member companies that include food retailers, wholesalers, distributors, and service providers in the state of Connecticut. CFA's members operate approximately 300 retail food stores and 135 pharmacies, with a combined estimated annual sales of $5.7 billion, representing 75% of all retail food stores in Connecticut. And the membership has everybody from large multi-store chains, regional firms, and smaller independent markets, employing a total of more than 30,000 associates. So please join me in welcoming Wayne Pesce.
Hi, Meg. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, you know, as part of the state's critical infrastructure, the food retail industry is unique because grocery stores and food distributors and food producers remained open throughout the late winter and spring in an effort to ensure food was available, as you know, thousands of other businesses were forced to close. Our 25,000 frontline associates performed and continue to perform an amazing community service, keeping our families fed and reaching out to help support our state's most food insecure. Starting on April 3rd, our organization and many of our members were involved with state government, with the governor's office, with local towns and communities, specifically Norwalk and Stanford when the virus first hit, where those areas were hot spots, and started to really try to get a handle on keeping our associates and the consumers who shop in our stores safe. A lot of unknowns at the time. I can rewind back to the beginning of March, and it seems like time has just gone so quickly since then. But we had worked on a set of rules with the governor's office around, he issued an executive order, safe store rules, but we had started to implement many of these protocols and worked with his office to get those in place. So they included, obviously, social distancing protocols, senior hours, early morning senior hours, so that, people could come in and shop safely and not shop in crowds. We capped our occupancy at 50%. To try and limit the size of the crowds that were in the stores. Shopping, one-way aisles, almost everybody installed plexiglass at the registers. We were encouraging one person per household shopping trips whenever possible. We discontinued all of the self-service food and drink offerings and eliminated product sampling during this time frame. We were encouraging touchless credit card transactions. At the time, people were uncomfortable with cash. We were encouraging the use of online ordering and ramped up and built up infrastructure around getting people online deliveries and sanitizing carts and baskets, and basically ensuring that all of our folks were following CDC guidelines at the time. So, and probably the most important thing, and it's interesting, I was following this around the world as it was happening, and I recall seeing a message from, I think it was Austria, had decided that everybody had to wear face masks back in April, and we implemented that probably, I want to say we got there in late May, but so that was another thing where we started requiring and asking customers to wear masks, and obviously our associates were well out ahead of that curve and had been wearing masks prior to that to try and keep themselves safe. So, I really want to just talk a little bit about COVID in general when it broke, and how far out in front Connecticut retailers were in front of the rest of the nation as it relates to these safety protocols and how important that they were. We had no massive breakout in any of our stores. There were places around the country where 40 associates were getting sick. I was on national calls with other retail associations telling them the things we were doing in Connecticut, and they just couldn't wrap their head around why we were doing what we were doing. And eventually everybody got there. So I'm going to give the retail community in Connecticut a lot of credit for being very progressive in their approach to keeping people safe, specifically their associates, but also customers. So that was something that we worked, a lot of heavy lifting around that, these safety measures in April and May. And simultaneously to trying to implement safety measures, we ran into a whole panic buying stretch. So as COVID lockdown measures were implemented across the country, starting on the West Coast and then in Connecticut during the middle of March, we experienced a surge of customer foot traffic as consumers started overbuying items, such as disinfectants, toilet paper, and canned goods. And each time an announcement was made, people rushed to the grocery stores to stock up and fill their pantries. This caused massive supply chain disruptions in the spring, driving widespread out of stocks and cash at store level. Retailers were forced to suspend ad activity, suspend rain checks, and institute buying limits on many items. There was no real shortage of food. It's just that people overbought and quite honestly did not leave enough for their neighbors who came in the store behind them. This panic buying also created a large vacuum in every retailer in the state's ability to supply local food banks and food pantries, as everything was being sold and product that was historically donated was no longer available. And then we ran into protein and meat shortages. The animal processing industry employs approximately 525,000 people with 3,500 facilities nationwide. In April and May, 23 states reported COVID-19 outbreaks at the time of 16,000 cases in 239 facilities. In late spring, the demand was trending about 130%, with capacity falling to 70%, causing a 70-point delta in supply versus demand nationally. Demand has since subsided, and supply is in better shape today than it was in the beginning of June. But that was something that, you know, the retailers here in the state were dealing with. That at the same time people were panic buying, we were also dealing with animal protein shortages and trying to work through that as well. You know, throughout April, May, and June, the Food Association, our organization, developed a bunch of consumer-focused social messaging campaigns to educate people on the importance of social distancing and masks and safe shopping practices. We utilized various print media outlets that informed legislators to notify them as to the work grocery stores were doing to keep people safe. And we did dozens of newspaper, radio, and television interviews to keep the public informed of the situation happening at food retail. So there was a lot going on at that time because I think there were a lot of unknowns and people were very concerned about what was happening at their local grocery store. And we started to try to mobilize and put as much information out as we could through the media to allay folks' fears about you know, if they were going to be able to feed their families or not. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the trends that we've seen. A lot of these trends were happening, but the COVID pandemic really accelerated some of them. So one of the trends we had seen prior to the COVID was plant-based foods. Very interesting to hear the Seaweed presentation. Kind of fits into one of those things that was trending and that's trending and growing. Plant-based foods continue to grow. However, as those animal protein shortages occurred, many customers and consumers who had not maybe purchased or tried plant-based foods went and did that. So we saw an explosion in growth in some of these plant-based offerings. Contactless payments, really driven by hygiene concerns. Even the smallest purchases today, prior to the pandemic, there was a move towards debit cards and credit cards and Apple Pay and things like that. But the COVID accelerated that. And you know, apps and cards, people are just carrying less cash. And it mirrors a larger trend of less contact. You know, even, you know, skeptical seniors are voluntarily making the switch. So that's something that we've seen. And then the other thing that we really saw, and this was a growing trend, but again, the COVID exploded this, was online purchasing. So, you know, consumers were migrating that way anyway, but many people were fearful of going out to the store, or they might have had health problems, and they didn't want to risk in-person shopping. So that shopping option gave them a sense of control, and it allowed them to shop from home and again, you know, avoid crowds and avoid human interaction. So those are three really big trends that we saw that were there prior to the COVID, but the COVID really accelerated them. And we're seeing a continuation of them as well as we start to kind of get back to, whatever the new normal is. I wanted to talk a little bit about resiliency. We just had a storm a couple weeks ago, but in 2012, when Hurricane Sandy hit, hundreds of grocery stores in Connecticut lost power, and it cost retailers millions in lost inventory. Since then, many food retailers have invested in backup generators. However, as we look to the future, fossil fuel burning generators are definitely not the best solution. Fuel cells and microgrids have been another solution that resiliency proponents have been advocating and are a better option than generators. But at the CFA and our organization specifically has been working with various groups and people to advance the idea of battery storage. Battery technology is advanced to the level that it can be obviously a much greener solution than generators or fuel cells, but the costs are a barrier at this point, and we're trying to figure out ways to get incentives to close that gap so that we can get that technology, adapted and get to a wider spread usage than, a grocery store having a generator in the back if there's a storm. So there's a lot happening on that front, and technology is changing that. But again, I think we need the financial incentives to make the investments in the infrastructure. But certainly relevant today as we speak, based on the last storm that just hit, and from you talk to most of the experts and folks that are working around climate change, and they'll tell you that these events will accelerate into the future. So something that we're thinking about, and something that we're trying to move forward as we think about resiliency and how do we keep grocery stores open, when the lights go out. And then food insecurity, as I mentioned previously, panic buying and protein shortages, caused a real gap in our members, the retail community's members' ability to donate food to food banks and food pantries. A lot of folks on this call work within that, that sphere somewhere or another, as do we. Our members donate 70% of all of the food that goes to the state's food banks. So we are all the way in as it relates to that. And, the pandemic made that very difficult because we really didn't have any food to donate. So something to think about there, and certainly something to plan for in the future when something like this might happen. And the other place that we were really engaged during the pandemic on food insecurity was with the Department of Agriculture and Department of Social Services. We've been communicating regularly with DSS around incremental funding that has come from the CARES Act to make sure that we knew when that money was going to be allocated to recipients, because when that happens, we need to know, because we need extra labor and extra product and extra supplies in the stores to make sure that when that rush comes, we have food available and we have labor available to stock it. So it's been a great partnership with the state in regards to that. And we also piloted an online program, an online WIC program through Amazon, Walmart, and ShopRite that allowed for our WIC recipients to order online. And we're looking at expanding that. So it was an interesting time. I like to tell people I worked harder in 30 days than I did in 30 years through the COVID. We're starting to see the other side of it. We're not all the way back to normal in the grocery stores, but we're getting there slowly. And I think that, as things start to normalize, and if there's not a second wave, we can start to, get back to normal where we were prior to the COVID, but still not there today, and still have a lot of work to do to make sure that we're keeping people safe, and that we, have the supply and presence and labor to keep stores stocked and keep people fed. So thank you. Appreciate your time. And, I just want to say that the disruptions to the supply chain and the safety of our associates and consumers and the social bond that, you know, we have with communities have all put in a different light due to the coronavirus. That's what I have, Meg.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Now I can open it up for questions. We'll just take 10 minutes here to ask questions for Wayne and Sam. You can go ahead and unmute yourself unless everybody unmutes at the same time, and then we'll do hand raising. But for now, just feel free to unmute and ask your question.
So Sam, this question is for Sam. This is Martha. What is there any thought as to the impact of like warming water temperatures on the ability to kind of like grow the things, to do the type of ocean farming that is being set up now? How is that being impacted by kind of like just water temperature?
Yeah, great question. The seaweed that we grow, the sugar kelp, is a cold water species, but it has a fairly large range, so you can grow it down through New York, essentially. So I would say we're not quite on the southern edge yet, but you're right that it's a concern. It's grown, yeah, so on the East Coast, it's grown from New York up, and then on the West Coast, it's from about the Bay Area of San Francisco, so just like draw that latitude around. But it is much more tolerant than something like lobsters, which are like all the way up in Canada now. There are barely any lobsters left in Maine. And I will say that one of the good things about the structure of a 3D ocean farm is that it's just a structure. You can grow other species on it. And in fact, GreenWave is actively deploying a farm out in California right now in collaboration with Humboldt State University that is growing a species of red algae. And this, they're not growing this particular species of red algae, but there is a type of red algae that, for example, has been shown to reduce methane emissions of livestock by up to 90% just by substituting it for 2% of their feed. So just because we couldn't grow sugar kelp if the waters do warm over time doesn't mean that we shouldn't figure out how to permit ocean farms, because there are 100,000 species of seaweed out there and we're currently cultivating one of them. So there's still a ton of opportunity, food and other sectors.
Can I ask a question of Wayne? Wayne, what if there is a second wave and there is kind of like an ancillary question to that? Do you foresee that some of the safety mechanisms that have been instituted for like grocery store staff, like wearing of masks and plastic shields and that type of stuff, might become a more, like during a normal flu season, might become a more normal aspect of how business is done? Or do you see this also accelerating automated checkout and not having as much staff?
Yeah, first of all, any announcement, any second wave is going to cause panic buying. It's human nature. So, the disruptions to the supply chain that we saw in April and May came because of announcements that people were hearing, and people ran to the stores because they want to make sure that they have enough food in their homes. So if there is a second wave, you can be fairly certain that people will behave exactly how they behaved the first time. So yeah, there would be some shortages and some disruption to the supply chain. But again, like I said earlier, there really weren't food shortages, as people were overbuying. And they will do that again if there's a second wave. I think a lot of it was driven by the media. You think about it, think about the storm that's coming that doesn't, really impact us that hard, but everybody ran to the store and stocked up and made sure they had enough food. This is very similar. The behavior's almost exactly the same. So I do anticipate problems with supply if there is a second wave. As far as safety protocols, I think a bunch of them are here to stay. I think some of them really make a lot of sense. Some of the touchless aspect of payment, I think the plexiglass shields probably aren't coming down. I think they make sense. I think that some retailers, you know, in flu season might require associates to wear masks. It's very difficult to get consumers and our customers to do anything. And, you know, one of the things that we struggle with, and we needed a lot of help from, you know, government and police departments and local officials, health officials, was, you know, the mask issue. Our associates, we can require that they wear masks, and we can ask customers to wear masks, but you know, that's been a bit of a stretch. But I can tell you, I think, Martha, a lot of the safety measures that were put into place that are actually really smart and reasonable will stay in place. I think we learned a lot.
Thank you. We do have time for one or two more questions if you want to take, if anybody has any more questions.
I had a question for Sam, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Sam, I was just wondering, when you said, you know, there's obviously this is one species that's been explored right here in Long Island Sound, but what about when you talk about other species of seaweed or whatever, the problem if you have like a non-native, like, I guess, what are the regulations if someone wants to grow a non-native, like a non-native species of seaweed in a different area? Because couldn't it potentially take over, just like you would have invasive growth in a lake or pond or something like that?
Yes, exactly. And we don't recommend growing non-native species, but even in the Long Island Sound, there are dozens of species of brown algae, which kelp is a brown, and then there's also red algae, and those are the two kind of segments that are most closely being looked at right now for commercial development. So there are plenty of other options, and as I said, around the world there are 100,000 species. So we have options, but you're 100% right to be concerned about introducing non-natives, and we don't recommend that.
Okay, thank you.
One more question before we go into the breakout groups. Okay, if there are no more questions, we're gonna move on to the breakout group portion. Each one of you is gonna be in a breakout group with one of our facilitators, and each facilitator has a breakout group board corresponding to their breakout group. So we'll just go over a few discussion questions, and this is really where we encourage everybody to put stuff up on the Jamboard, and it can be related to these presentations. We really hope that that those were two really interesting conversations that we really hope help spark more conversations in our groups. So with that, I am gonna put us all into our breakout groups, and you should find yourself in a breakout group momentarily. Okay, so since we are all back, one of you from each breakout group is just going to report out on some of the highlights. There are 5 groups, so we'll try to keep it like to name one sticky note from each of the questions. And I am screen sharing right now, correct? Yeah. So first, I'm going to hand it over to Ellen from group 1. To kind of recap our conversation.
Sure. So for assets, we talked about the Hartford regional market being something that could be more supported and like boosted out, like more people knowing about it, things like that. And then for gaps, we talked a lot about missing data in terms of access, like where is the food coming from versus where is the food here? Can people actually get to it? Do things like that. And then for stakeholders that we thought would be a good idea to engage would be, so folks on the emergency side, so soup kitchens, places like that, what kind of they would know the most about those situations. And then maybe tapping into philanthropic groups that are kind of allied, people who have money who might be just outside communities that don't, and maybe we could make some matches that way, to bridge some wealth gaps, because Connecticut does have a lot of income, a lot of people, but there's a huge disparity there. So we thought those would be some good people to engage, make things happen.
Group 2.
Hi, everyone. I'm presenting out for group 2. So we had a really lively discussion. Some of the things that came up in our group for assets, we recognize that Connecticut has some of the best farmland in the country. We also have, our coastline is protected. I would also say that we have vacant plots that could be refurbished to grow food. And we have a lot of empty buildings that are owned by the state that could be used as food hubs or distribution centers or to grow food. We also have a lot of guides and projects that are already under the works. Some of them have been produced by the Department of Agriculture, Renew Connecticut, Sustainable CT, all things that we should be looking into. We have 98 farmers markets for gaps. We recognize that we don't really have a centralized food hub. The regional market is up and running, but it could be better. It was sold by the state to a private company a few years ago, so we should maybe consider engaging them. We also recognize, back to assets, that we do currently have 2 food hubs in the state, so they are an asset. Another thing as relates to gaps, accessible and affordable farmland. We don't really have direct subsidies for mid-sized and small producers. We don't have a USDA poultry processing facility in the state, or a plan for meat and dairy processing. And we need more farmers markets that are just not marketed to rich white people, sell culturally appropriate food, and are more inclusive. And then in terms of engaging stakeholders, we talked about engaging farmers, both ocean farmers and land farmers, livestock farmers, farm workers, legislators, policymakers, restaurant workers, grocery workers, processing workers, BIPOC representation from both urban and rural areas in the state, and consumers in general.
Thank you. Group 3.
Yep, I'm going to present for the group. This is Martha. So this was, my Jamboard skills are not as great as they need to be, because I don't have lots of very colorful sticky notes, stuck with basic yellow. But just to highlight a couple of things from our conversation. One of the things that we thought was a huge asset is that we do have, in Connecticut, you have both a customer base with disposable income, but you also, even when you have communities where there's a lot of folks who are socioeconomically challenged, it represents a very diverse customer base that is, so the potential for markets is huge, racially, ethnically, and that is something that is that Connecticut has in abundance. Among the gaps that are noted there, the one that I would highlight is the infrastructure that's needed to offer Connecticut products consistently: cold storage, meat processing, flash freezing, etc. There's a little bit of it in the state, just simply not enough. And so it forces producers to either do something else or to go somewhere else, which is not, which is a gap that needs filling. And then finally, I think I saw this on at least one other board, there's money that's needed. Funders, foundations, investors, philanthropists who are interested in the idea of both a state and a regional food shed, and understands what kind of like that's kind of like a long haul investment. And that's what our group did.
Thank you. Let's move on to group 4.
Thank you, Meg. So we had actually a very good discussion. We did a good conversation about assets. I think the most interesting one that we come up was the huge need for space and ice skating rinks, the fact that they're essentially refrigerators sitting there with the ice and that could be used. Looking at basically a couple areas to help leveraging the buying power of larger users, supermarkets, school systems could be better used to distribute, as well as working with existing restaurant, university, as well as commercial processing and other organizations. Gaps, couple things, if we look at kind of COVID, the shortages of meat, which Wayne had mentioned. Also the fact that there's really no, I think somebody else meant, no centralization, which is if somebody had food they wanted to donate, whether it's a store or a farm, no real place to send it, and then no great way to get it out there. I think right now, as I understand it, there's a lot of food pantries, but not necessarily cohesion. Let's see, refrigerated trucks hard to come by, and really help businesses to be able to pivot more quickly. And I think because if they're in the industry, for instance, I wrote down here Sardilli. Sardilli Foods is in Hartford. They're moving to Windsor. I grew up with one of the sons. They have a facility they're going to be growing. If they knew how to partner in a situation like this, they could probably pivot and do more than just their business, but do a public service while having people employed. Additionally, getting the farms and food retailers involved to figure out who has the best buying power, who can help with this, and really helping create a path for, if not COVID part 2, but going forward for whatever happens, because if there's a huge need for food, it's going to be challenging. And we saw too is the biggest issues were in the urban areas where you have more residents, less supermarkets, and where you have your food deserts. And that's really where it's most challenging, because if people are hoarding in the cities, a whole lot of people are going to be without. I think the group was great, a lot of creative ideas, different people had spoken, and this is a great way to do it. So thank you, Meg.
Thank you. Pause long enough to remember how to count, and I skipped. Did I skip? Oh, no. Okay. I thought that I skipped one in here. I do know how to count. Yeah, so that leaves us with group 5. Tashana was facilitating. Can somebody report out from that group?
Yeah, I am. Okay. So just a few highlights, I guess, from what our group was talking about. In terms of assets, we focused a lot on the existing community organizations within the state. There's a lot of grassroots food justice organizations, urban farms that exist, and outside of that, there's great institutions such as UConn and other groups that put out information. And that leads into gaps, though, is that there's kind of a big disconnect in information sharing. So there's a lot of resources that exist in the state and guides and whatever, as Chelsea said as well, but there's not very good structures in place to get that, to disseminate that information. Another gap that we identified, other groups did as well, is the lack of processing and aggregation facilities. And then funding was also a big one that we were talking about. And then in terms of stakeholders, I mean, everyone here, and then groups such as schools and city and town governments, urban planners, but then also farm workers and food service workers, so people who are working across the food system and who are very impacted both by a lot of the work that are both like involved in the food system and also are frequently the ones who are experiencing food insecurity or who are in need of a lot of the resources as well. And there's not a good mechanism to get that information and that aid to those people as well.
Thank you. So I did get everybody got to present, right? Looks like yes. Okay. So thank you all for being in your breakout groups. I really enjoyed the conversation in my group. I really enjoyed hearing from everybody. We do have about 14 minutes left together today. And so we can have a little bit of open discussion. If you have any further questions for each other or something from another group really kind of stood out to you as something you want to know more about or something that you want to comment on, please feel free. The floor is open.
I think this is Martha. I think one of the things that resonates with me from, that the number of times that lack of proper processing infrastructure has come up, and the part that is, I think the most dismaying about that is that has been a conversation for as long as I can remember having conversations about how Connecticut can do a better job. So I would be really interested in anyone's perspective on what is the main stumbling block to actually having that occur, to just do a better job of this, because there's clearly a market. So what is the constraint to?
Nobody wants it. I think that's the constraint, right? Nobody wants to have a processing plant in their backyard. That's what I think.
I don't know that that's the case. I mean, that it is. I mean, it happens in Massachusetts. It happens in Vermont. It happens elsewhere. It actually happens in Connecticut, but it's just insufficient. So.
Well, I think what it is I don't think we have any major producers. I mean, in some places too, we have the family-owned firms, but I don't think we have any monstrous producers who could ramp up in a need like we've had. That's my own thoughts anyway, but I mean, I could be mistaken.
I think you hit a piece there in that we don't have any major producers, but we have many small producers. And we have a lot of small private processing facilities, but not a giant one. And so the cost of a USDA certification, I think, is the stumbling block there.
Yeah, and I think I can. Oh, sorry.
No, you go for it.
Yeah, so I can actually, even though I came here to talk about seaweed, I used to run a company called Fleischer's, which had 5 retail butcher shops in the New York City metro area and a USDA processing facility in Brooklyn. And we were one of the largest buyers of pasture-raised animals in the Northeast. So the idea that there aren't people raising animals in the Northeast is not the case. It's a very, New England is unique. It's never going to look like the Midwest. We're never going to have feedlots and massive prairies, and that's okay. What we have is the ability to incorporate livestock into rotations on our diversified farms to improve the quality of our land over time. And so what you end up seeing in New York, Vermont, other states that have more advantageous agricultural policies is that a farmer will have a few different parcels. They'll have animals spread out over many different parcels, and they'll actually be rotating them across the different places, and they need kind of throughways. But other than that, it's fine that they're not concentrating the animals, and in fact, it's better for the quality of the environment. What has been challenging, I think, with the slaughterhouse situation in New England is that people sometimes jump to the conclusion that we need more, and what we actually need is better. So the only super high quality slaughterhouse in the entire New England area is Vermont Packing House, which is in a terrible location. It's in North Springfield, Vermont. It could not be the worst location in both in terms of accessibility and in terms of labor. They're constantly struggling to find good employees and staff it. Connecticut is actually a fantastic location for a slaughterhouse given its proximity to other cities. What usually happens is when a farm gets too big, they go to Pennsylvania. So they go straight through Connecticut all the way to Pennsylvania to get, when they get to like 40 head of cattle a week or pigs or whatever. So, you know, we need a bigger slaughterhouse that is USDA, that has a labor force, and that, yeah, that's just run by people who know what they're doing. Like the bigger, it's not so much a like capital issue as a human capital issue.
Is it something where, you know, like there are co-ops that get started where everybody's kind of doing the same production? Is it worth working with the local, you know, chicken producers, poultry producers to, or even the beef? I don't know much about animal husbandry or processing, but is it worth organizing those people into kind of pooling resources and then assisting them with other funding, you know, with the oodles of money that we all have, to create a facility that can serve all of them, and they can create like a poultry co-op?
Yeah, I mean, poultry, I will say that poultry is a very different animal, literally, but also like business animal than the larger animals. You usually have a plant that does one or the other. But yes, you will need aggregation of some kind, because even, yeah, in either case, you're going to have, because we do have many smaller producers, you need to have them all bring in on the same day, or like someone who buys from all of them, and then so there's one name on the invoice, one name on the scheduling ticket or whatever.
Yeah, and also I think poultry is kind of like a good segue into, like, there's many different kinds of processing facilities, like a large slaughterhouse is one form of a processing facility, but processing facilities can take the form of like mobile poultry slaughter units, or they can be like processing units in terms of like looking for like beyond livestock, but like for like flash freezing of produce, or for like value added production, or commercial kitchen space. Like all of those are forms of processing facilities as well.
And perhaps the mobile makes more sense with the dispersed producers.
Yeah, this is Kip. I don't know if people can hear me. Yeah, and I think that the farm to school, farm to institution, I just think there's so much potential, because obviously for somebody to, you know, to be a processor of fruits and vegetables, they need to be able to work year round. So whether it's, you know, doing flash freezing or processing sauce, and if we could get, you know, more indoor agriculture that maybe is growing products that can be processed, dried, or frozen. So I think that's also been, you know, part of the issue with some of the slaughterhouses, is that it's not spread out enough throughout the year to be able to keep workers employed and be able to make money if you're only working for part of the year. So I think that's also an issue with processors when you have a lot of small producers, is that there's, you know, there's not the demand through the year like there are in some parts of the country for processing fruits and vegetables. So, you know, again, if you can have some established markets for processed local food, local or regional foods, you're more likely to get somebody interested in being a processor.
Thank you. I did want to draw attention to two resources that people just dropped into the chat. One from Serena about the Livestock Institute, as well as an animal processing facility in Eastern Connecticut. Thank you, Julia. It's NewEnglandMeatpacking.com. Those are both there in the chat for you. I did want to quickly go through kind of what our next steps are here. Can you see the slide? Or do I need to change it?
We see
yes.
it.
Okay.
Yep.
So our next sessions, the next one is going to be on Tuesday at 10 a.m. This is really going to be about funding, which came up several times here today. So I'm really happy to be able to advance that conversation. But we're also interweaving that with talking about policy. So that will be next week on Tuesday at 10 a.m. And then we'll have this final session where we're going to kind of conclude and sum up a lot of what we talked about at each one of these focus sessions. That'll be on October 7th at 6 p.m. So hopefully you can all join us there. I also did just want to float the idea of like some of the ways that we're thinking of following up on this. We don't really want this to just be a one-time thing, but we also don't want to just like declare you all to be in a working group now where you have to come meet and see each other all the time. But we are looking to regroup and revisit this in January. There may be things that come up afterwards or that we're looking at, for example, for the legislative session. So we really do want to be able to, you're invited to regroup with us in January. And so we'll be sharing more information about that later. We do have a little bit of extra time here. So now that I've gotten out my housekeeping notes, we can just continue this conversation a little bit more if you want with the extra time, or I can let you go up into this nice late summer afternoon. Okay, well, special thanks again to Sam and Wayne for those really awesome presentations. I think you really kind of sparked our conversations. Thank you especially to Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Foundation, and thank you to the Leadership Greater Hartford Quest group for helping to facilitate and plan these meetings, and hope to see you all next week.